Which activity would be easier for you? Describe the best life you could achieve over the next 20 years, or describe the best things that have happened to you over the last 20 years. I already know your answer to that question, and so does today's guest. And listen, the implications for how this simple question can impact how much you love your homeschool are big. So let's get into it. Welcome to the Read-Aloud Revival. This is the show that helps you make meaningful and lasting connections with your kids through books. I'm your host, Sarah Mackenzie. I'm a homeschooling mother of 6, the author of Teaching from Rest, The Read-Aloud Family, several award-winning picture books for kids, and I'm so excited about today's episode. This summer, I read All It Takes is a Goal, the 3-step plan to ditch regret and tap into your massive potential by Jon Acuff. I loved it. There was one thing in particular that I read in this book and thought, oh my goodness, this is so relevant to us at Read-Aloud Revival. I wonder if I could get Jon Acuff, the author, to come talk on the show with us about it. And it turns out I could. He's here today. Jon is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. He's an Inc. magazine top 100 leadership speaker. He's also a husband and a father of 2 teenage girls whom he just wrote a book with. We're going to talk about it. How Teens Win is a book about goals by Jon and his daughters, Ellie and McCrae. So awesome. Jon, welcome to the Read-Aloud Revival.
That was a great intro. I felt good about that entire intro. There's not a lot of pressure. Not a lot of pressure in that intro.
Not a lot of pressure at all. New York Times bestselling author, top leadership speaker.
Well, you start with, again, we joked about this off camera. When the intro is like, he won a poetry contest in the 7th grade. He shoots lasers right out of his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, and you're like, oh my gosh. Like,
I got to bring it.
I better be amazing. I better be. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I want to paint a picture. Jon, I haven't told you this yet, but I was in Texas this last summer speaking at a homeschooling conference near Austin. I had a book signing event like 2 hours north, and as I was driving, I was listening to your audiobook, All It Takes is a Goal. And first, I just have to tell you, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and you can rock an audiobook. I feel like...
Oh, thank you.
Usually, authors just read it exactly how it is in the book, but I felt like I was getting extra. So I loved it. Your conversational sidebars, hearing your voice.
Yeah, we tried to put bonus stories in, and the problem with me in audiobooks is I don't have the greatest weapon, which is a British accent. If I had a British accent, I would sell 100 times. You hear somebody with a British accent, you add 80 IQ points. So they could read a grocery list. You're like, did you hear the way he said avocado? I don't have that. So I have to add lots of bonus content, lots of sidebars, and I want it to be a conversation and I want it to be fun. And so, I really try to make those almost like a performance versus here's just an audio version.
It's funny that you say that because I always tell moms at these conferences the same thing. Like when I'm really frustrated with my kids, I just switch into a British accent because you can say all kinds of things to your kids and they just think it's funny, great. Even if you're insulting them.
Yeah, that's great.
I'm sure this does really not work in England.
Parenting hack. Yeah. I don't know. Well, that's the thing. No one in England hears an American accent and goes, oh my gosh, let's lean in. It only works one direction. Now, Australians get it too. South Africans get it too. I've never been abroad and somebody go, say that word again in that amazing American accent. So we don't have that weapon at our disposal, but I think we make up for it.
Totally true. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's start with the quiz at the top of the show that I mentioned. And this comes right out of your book, Chapter 1. You ask, which activity is easier for you? Describe the best life you could achieve over the next 20 years, or describe the best things that have happened to you over the last 20 years. Talk to me about this. Why is this so hard for us to imagine what we want?
I just think we've gotten dreaming backwards forever. Like we've misinterpreted brilliant ideas. So like Stephen Covey wrote, begin with the end in mind. And people have interpreted that into, until I know the end, I can't begin. I have to have, and we say to people, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal? Where do you see yourself in 20 years? And you go, what? And for me, I've written, a bunch of books, self-help, motivational, business books. That question paralyzes me. The idea that I have to guess the next 20 years. I didn't see what I'm doing right now 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I couldn't have majored in this in college because it didn't exist. Right. Social media. So we put this pressure on ourselves to say, okay, where do you see yourself in 20 years? And I think it's nearly impossible. And in my experience, it creates what I would call a vision wall between people and their goal. So
Mm.
it's like this huge wall you have to scale, and you think it has to be perfect, and it triggers all these, well, I have to have it just right. It stirs up perfectionism. And so I just felt in my own life, I'm stuck. I don't know how to do that activity. What if instead I looked back? And nobody looks that direction. We say things like, don't look back, you're not going that way. And we lose all this knowledge, all this real texture of things that have lit us up. And so I said, I wonder, and I was sitting in the airport. I was in Augusta, Georgia. I remember where I was. It was a small little airport. And I said, what if I just thought through the best moments I've had and looked for clues as to what might be good in the future too? And so I just gave myself this really open, easy assignment, and I just started to make a list. And that's what started. And the freedom for that, and I taught it to hundreds of people before I put it in the book. People, I would say, try 30, and people would end up doing 300. And it would just open up this really rich conversation with yourself, with your past, and eventually with your future too. So that's how it started.
Well, so when you ask, like, what are some of the best moments? And I love how you give some examples. Let's see if I can pull up a few of them fast enough. Let's see. Okay, so you have a couple examples that you gave were, big ones, like my wedding day, the birth of my 2 kids, when I paid off my student loans. And then there were little ones like petting my neighbor's dog Scout when I'm cooling down after a run.
Yeah.
Or the time my friend and I ate a 9-pound lobster on Martha's Vineyard. It was
That was
the size
amazing.
of a carry-on suitcase and had to be opened with a circular saw.
Yeah, it was amazing. I would have that photo on my driver's license if the DMV weren't such jerks. Like it was amazing. I still, and we rented mopeds that day too and drove them around the island. Like it was all good. Yeah. So the key there is I told people fire the bouncer. Like it all counts. We get really wrapped up in what counts and what doesn't count, especially if you're a high performer. And if you're listening to this podcast, congratulations, you're a high performer, because low performers don't voluntarily listen to podcasts about being better parents. I tell people all the time, if you're even asking the questions about how to be a better parent, you're already a better parent than you think, because the average parent isn't asking those questions. So I really wanted to give people the permission to include everything, the big things, but also the small things, like seeing my youngest daughter's headlights come back into the driveway and we're sitting on the back porch means she's home safe. And it's this really small thing, but it's a meaningful thing to me. So I wanted to have a chance for people to have really tiny things too, and not just go, well, I've never hit the New York Times list, so that doesn't, I can't put, I can't put writing a book on. I saw an example of this at a bookstore. It's funny you mentioned a book signing. I was doing a book signing and a guy came up to me and the manager was helping me. And he said, I wrote a book too. And he goes, but it's just self-published. And the bookstore manager stopped him and said, sir, you're a real author. Like, don't say just self-published. You wrote a real book. And his countenance changed. And so that was her opening up, like, no, that counts. That counts.
Yeah.
And so I wanted people to have the joy and the permission to write as many things down, as small as they were, as insignificant, as weird. If there's something you do that other people think is weird, but it really lights you up, you're unique to that. Let's celebrate that. Let's pay attention to that.
I love this because what I noticed when I did this myself, because I did it right away that night, I opened a notes app on my phone and was like, all right, let me just start jotting down some of my best moments. And it actually, over the next several days, I just noticed myself noticing them, like the things that I think would have just skipped on by.
Yeah, it's wild. It turns on your eyes and your heart. So it's, I say, like, it's a shortcut to self-awareness. You get all these immediate benefits where it increases your gratitude like crazy. Everybody always says, be grateful, but there's not an activity. And you're like, I'll just yell at myself until I'm grateful. And you go, no, this actually makes me grateful. But you're right. You start noticing them in your past. And then what happens is you can't help but notice them in your present. And then you can't help but go, I want more of that. Like there's this progression where you see it in the moment. And I say in the book, like, my definition of being present is being nostalgic about a moment you're still in. And so, like, this morning,
so good.
I didn't have to reflect a week later. This morning, I took my daughter to coffee. She's going to college in 2 weeks. And we went on a walk around our little town, and our friend's daughter just opened up a boutique. She's 20 and just opened a boutique called the Statement Society. And it was open. It was like 9 a.m. and we were the only people in there. And it was their grand opening, and we were able to shop and support them. And my friend was there too. And I knew that moment was best in the moment. I didn't need to wait a month to reflect and go, oh, that was a good moment. And that amplifies the way I describe it is it's like putting on, like when you see videos and people put on color glasses and they could finally see colors for the first time. They've been
Yeah.
colorblind.
Yeah.
And they all cry because they go, wait, trees are green? Like what? I didn't. Or when a baby hears with cochlear implants for the first time its
Yes.
mother's voice. And like,
Yes.
if you don't cry when you watch those videos, you are dead inside. So like, it just turns on your ability to really appreciate it. And so for me, it just had so many practical instant benefits.
Yeah, it's true. Okay, so one of the things that I feel like happens all the time for homeschooling moms specifically, we'll ask these questions like, okay, what do I want for my homeschooling year? What do I want my kids' education to look like? We're doing the same thing you talked about where it's like, we're looking forward. You probably know this statistic. It's not a statistic, but this fact, I guess. It's something like ourselves more than a year in advance is like a different person. We're envisioning a different person than we are.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, you can't really set a goal, like a 10-year goal, because you're like, that's a fictional person.
Well, it's also a fictional world. Nobody would have included COVID in their prediction.
Exactly.
Like, God help us if we still think we can control everything.
That's right.
We just got a multi-year reminder. Like I remember the joke I sometimes share with people is, in late January of 2020, I opened up for Dolly Parton at the Ryman Auditorium. Like it was the dream of all dreams. And she was amazing. She was every bit a person that you wanted to be. And I drove home and I was like, this is only January. The rest of this year is going to be amazing. Oh, and it was like the narrator was like, it was not to be amazing. Every one of my speaking events got canceled. That's 80% of my business. Like,
yeah.
I wouldn't have 5 years ago. I didn't go, I could see year 5, like a global pandemic. I better pencil that in. So I think you should have long range vision. Definitely.
Sure.
I'm not against that. I just want you to hold it fairly loosely.
This is perfect because it's the idea of like orienting yourself in the right direction. Like if I'm on the West Coast and I want to go to the East Coast, I know I at least need to be facing this way. I might not know all the roads, turns, stop signs, highways that I'm going to take. Yeah. I love that. I've heard an author, I can't remember who it was. That's okay. But there was like, she was talking about how you don't really need to know all of what you're going to write. You just need to write as far as your headlights, because you could get from the West Coast to the East Coast just on your headlights.
Oh yeah.
But you have to be going in the right direction. So that long-term vision is helpful. But for homeschooling moms, I think one of the things that happens is we do one of two things. Either we go like, I don't know what I want my homeschooling year to look like. I'm just trying to survive. I'm trying to keep everybody fed and healthy and to soccer practice on time. And I think we're supposed to do math. Like there's all these things. Yeah. Or we paint this picture that's completely impossible. And this happens maybe more often than we'd care to admit, where, we're scrolling Instagram and you see like the mom who is doing like great, amazing field trips, road schooling or something, taking her kids all over the country, and someone else who's reading these classics, and another one who's growing at homestead. Like everyone has chickens, right? And
they're always cutting cucumbers into shapes you've never heard of. Like I made octagon cucumbers today for my kids because it teaches them math. And they ate them. They were so excited for cucumber day, and you're like, no, they weren't. Why are you lying?
Exactly. So then we were like, oh, I am never going to be able to fulfill this kind of homeschool or whatever. As you were talking about the best moments list in your book, I was like, this is what we should do. Just think, like even just go back 1 year. You could go back 5 though, if you wanted. Because in here you're saying, best moments in the last 20 years. Yeah. What are some of your best moments? I know for me, that's actually pretty easy. I can name certain field trips I thought were fun, certain books that we read aloud, like a blanket fort that we did spelling under one day, things like that are like kind of easy. Like when I get going, when I start, like you said, you're thinking, okay, just do 10. Okay, could I do 20? Okay, you could actually probably do 200. Like they actually start rolling. In the second chapter, you actually outline several questions that we can ask, like prompts to help you think of your best moments. I would love it if we could walk through a few of these, because I think they would be really helpful to our listeners, watchers.
Yeah, totally. Which prompt do you want to like? Give me a prompt and we'll break it down.
Okay, let's start with every time I see blank, I smile.
Yeah, so that one's fun because it's really open-ended. It can be a person, a place, a thing. And so an example, what's funny, the person I mentioned in the book is this guy, Rob Santel. Every time I see him, I smile and laugh, and he's just so full of joy. And we all have friends like that in our life. And I saw him this morning. It's his daughter who opened up the Statement Society. So I was able to go, oh man, Charlie always makes me feel encouraged. And I, all of a sudden you write down your 10 cheerleaders. And then I said, every time I crest the hill in Mont Eagle. So I live outside of Nashville in a town called Franklin. And when you drive from Atlanta back to Nashville, You battle your way through Atlanta, which hates you. Atlanta hates you so much. And then you battle your way through Chattanooga, and the highway there is terrible. And then you get to this ridge called Mont Eagle. And when you're on the other side, it flattens out and it's home free to Nashville. So every time I just see the sign for Mont Eagle, I'm like, okay, I did it. And it can be an item. It can be your favorite pair of walking shoes, because those things represent progress, and just seeing them makes you go. Or it can be a necklace your husband gave you on your 10th anniversary, and it lights you up that you're like, we did that. And again, that's one of those things that turns on your eyes, because you'll start to see them and start to go, man, every time I see this song pop up on my playlist, it's one of my favorite worship songs and it fires me up. Or every time I see this Bible verse. So that one's real. I wanted to start with one that was really easy and gave you lots of avenues. And again, reinforced, it all counts. It all counts. It all counts.
Well, it's making you, so one of the things I noticed about this is it's not like, no one says every time I see the mom cutting cucumbers into perfect shapes, I smile. But we are like, we're actually looking at our real life. Like, so what it's doing is it's making you see the things that you're already doing.
Yeah, not somebody else's. Yeah, it's giving you, that's the thing. I would say one of the things I repeat the most for people is you're doing better than you think. You're doing better than you think. And again, people in our circle, people who are like, I want to improve my parenting, I want to improve my life, whatever. Are often doing better than they think, because they'll say, I'm doing these 7 goals and I don't think they're working. And you go, the average parent does 0 goals. Like the average parent doesn't know where their kid is right now. Like, you're already doing better than you think. Again, it shows you your life, not somebody else's. Here's what I'd say about that. So we've touched on Instagram a few times and the perfect homeschooling mom. The key you have to remember is this is new. Like, the type of comparison we have access to is new. We don't give ourselves credit for that. My mom, when she was raising me in the 1980s, could only compare her motherhood to 3 other moms on our cul-de-sac. That's it. Right. She didn't have access to what a mom was doing in Houston, Texas, or a mom in Spokane, Washington. But now you have access to every mom who's alive in 30 seconds. And we haven't given ourselves credit for that's a new, difficult challenge we haven't adapted to yet.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we have to pause and go, oh, that's right. That's right. My mom didn't struggle with this because she had moms at church, but she didn't have 10 million moms at church. They weren't doing video. When I was being raised as a kid, if somebody went on a vacation and said, come over and watch our slideshow on like a Kodak reel, you'd be like, no, thank you. That sounds terrible. And then now that's what we do. If a friend of mine, if one of my mom's friends in 1988 was like, we went to Disney World and I made like a 60-second video about that, I'd like to show you that a lot. You'd be like, that's gross.
That's weird.
What? No, that's weird. No, I don't need to see the highlights of your vacation.
Why did you make that? Yeah.
And now we just do that. That's right. And I do it too. I do it with other authors. It's so tempting, and it's tempting because it's really well done. It's not accidental. That's the other thing I sometimes say is Netflix doesn't want you to raise good kids. They don't care about that. Netflix doesn't want you to get in shape. Instagram doesn't want you to have a happy marriage. That's not their goal. Their goal is turning your attention into money. And so I think if you can focus on your own life, because people say stay in your lane, you look on your side of the fence. And my big thing is what's a tactical, practical way to do that? And this is one of them.
Yeah, this is one of them. I smile whenever I see. I love it. Okay, here's another one. This one might be tricky depending on what season a mom is in. But if I had a free hour today, I'd spend it blank. I say it's tricky because when my husband and I have 6 kids, they're now all older. But when they were 12, 10, 8, we had a 1-year-old and twin newborns. So I would have easily said sleeping, obviously.
Yeah,
right?
That was an easy answer. Yeah, it depends on the season. You're right. And I think that's such a great word for it, because I'll have moms, especially young moms, who will say, hey, I'm blowing my goals. I'm not doing great on my goals. And I go, well, tell me about your life. And I go, I got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and twin 6-month-old. And I go, you're raising humans. You're in charge of humans, right? That's a wild goal. We don't count that sometimes as a goal. It's oh, you should just be good at being in charge of humans. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is challenging. This is hard. Yeah. So I think season is a great word. But I wanted to try to get people to go, you're right. If I had 30 minutes or I had 60 minutes or even 10 minutes, I would love to read, or I would love to walk. What I found with some of these things is it's like having a reunion. You end up having a reunion with some part of you that you forgot you loved.
Yeah.
And it reminds you. And so a lot of people, when they do the list, go, oh, why did I stop doing that? Or why did I quit that? I forgot how much I used to love puzzles, even for 10 minutes. Like that was, it turned my brain off.
Yeah.
Why did I? Because there wasn't a day where you said, I'm stopping puzzles. I will never do a puzzle again. Or I quit knitting. I hate knitting. Like you didn't, it just kind of life got busy and chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. And so at a lot of times in the list, you find something that you go, oh, this used to light me up. Why did I put it down? I'm going to pick it back up again.
Yeah. And then another way you could think about this question too, and I was thinking specifically for homeschoolers, for most of us homeschooling moms, there's more things we want to do with our kids than time to do it in. So we're always having to
And by the way, that's a good thing. So let me pause on that for a second.
Yep,
that's a wonderful thing. And I like one of the soundtracks I use, I wrote a book called Soundtracks about mindset, is my imagination is bigger than my calendar. My imagination is bigger than my calendar. So the calendar is 7 days. It's been the same 365 days for centuries. Yeah. My imagination is massive and boundless. And so I want to release the pressure of any mom who listens to this and goes, I have more to do than I have time to do. You should, because you're really creative and you have a huge imagination. And I would never want you as a mom to come to me and say, I have no ideas for my kids. I'm out of desires for my kids. I'm out of ideas for my that would be the worst. That would actually be the real problem. Like
that'd be a tragedy, really. Yeah.
I don't want anything for the future of my kids. Like I finished caring about like ideas for the future of my kids. That's not going to be our problem. So I want you to see that as a gift, not a curse, that you have more you want to do. Like, and I think you always will. Like, I think you always will. And I think that's a feature, not a problem.
So good. Okay. I love this. And then we can actually, so then if it's a feature and not a problem, we can go, okay, well, for a second, while I'm making this best moments list, if I had a spare hour in my homeschool that I could do anything with my kids specifically in homeschooling, what would I do? You know, it might be reading aloud. It might be taking them on cool field trips. It might be science experiments. I guess some people like those. It could be all kinds of different things, right? But then we can go like, oh, is there a way that since I know would go on my best moments list, or these were some of my favorite memories from homeschooling before when we were able to squeeze them in, can we make that a bigger part of what we're doing? Or at least not even a bigger part, but just can we make sure it has a spot at all? It doesn't have to be every week, but like maybe once this year, could we, whatever it is.
Yeah, can we add, well, if you're not doing it at all, one is infinitely more. So the pressure is you can't go, I love this, I'm going to do it every week. Like what I find with people who are goal focused, and your audience is definitely goal focused, is they sometimes go, like the book says, from nothing to everything. And that's a ton of pressure. So they try something. And I meet people all the time that'll go, I write on Tuesdays. I just always write on Tuesdays. And I go, how many times have you done it? They'll go, once. I did it this Tuesday. So from here on out, I write on Tuesdays. And I go, that feels like you're going to go from once to 52 weeks. And that's a lot of pressure. Like, what if we said, like you said, could we do it one more time? Don't add the word perfect to any of these prompts. If I had an hour, how would I pick the perfect thing to do? Like, now it's a chore. Now it's additional task. Now the joy has already left the room. It's like, no, here's 5 things I would do, and I'm going to pick one, and I'm going to do it. One of the soundtracks I say is some beats none. Some beats none, because for a perfectionist would rather get a 0 than a C-. So an example would be, I meet perfectionists that'll say, John, my goal is to run 3 miles today. I only have time for 2, so I'm not going to do any. And I'll go, 2 is infinitely more than none. But perfectionists, it's all or nothing. And so if you can say, no, it's going to be 15 minutes and 15 minutes, some beats none. Some beats none. So that's a soundtrack we say in our family. Like one of our parenting soundtracks is some beats none, some beats none.
So
that
good.
Little stuff adds up.
Well, okay, so one of my twins, the twins are now 11, and I asked them just recently, how would you finish this sentence? I'm curious. I wish we had more time to blank together. And
that's good.
Yeah. Okay, so without skipping a beat, one of my twins said, look at birds. So my first thought was like, oh, we could do a bird unit. We could study birds. Yeah. And I'm like looking at my schedule and I'm like, oh, wait, we already have science at co-op. Where am I going to fit this in? And it occurred to me, or on Saturday, we could just go look at the birds in the woods by our house.
Yeah.
It's like we make it exactly like you said. We take it to 100 so fast.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you're like, I'll get a vest with a lot of pockets, and I'll, like
Yeah,
I'll become
exactly.
a birder. I'm a
Yeah.
professional birder now, and like we'll follow whooping cranes as they migrate. And you're like, wait,
Yeah.
or we could go on Saturday,
Yeah.
like to a lake that we know has birds, and
Exactly.
spend an hour looking at birds and go, yeah, that scratched the itch. Because the kid might go, that's enough birds, or
That
he
was
might go,
it. That's all I
I want
wanted.
more. I want to double
Yeah.
down, mom. I want twice as many birds next week. And you go, okay. Oh, a little skin in the game. Let's go. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
but I think that's just human nature to want to go to the extreme. But
Yeah.
the older I get, the more I'm able to be flexible, and maybe even generous with myself as far as like a little bit counts, like a
Yeah.
little bit, like, I have a buddy who teased me. I ran 1.2 miles and posted it on Strava. And he was like, dude, 1.2 miles? What? I would never just do that amount and put it on Strava. And I was like, yeah, but it adds up over, like, all I had time for was 1.2. And if I do 50 1.2 mile runs over the year, it's 50 extra miles. Like,
Yeah.
I ran 2 miles today, and I didn't beat myself up when I got in and be like, I can't believe you only did two. I was like, cool. That was a little bit extra. Some beats none. Like, some beats none.
Some beats none. So good. Okay, so you mentioned here, like, you're basically talking about easy goals, which is something that you talk about in your book, and I would love
Yeah.
to talk about those a little bit. I don't know if you said this in your book or if I heard you on your podcast, which I'll put a link to your podcast.
Oh, thanks.
What is the name of your podcast? I'm
All it takes is a goal.
All it takes is, wow, I
Yeah.
can't believe I didn't
Right
remember
there. I
that.
put it on the front of the book. It's pretty. Yeah.
I subscribe to it, so I just listened to it. I
Totally.
haven't looked it up. Okay, so you might have said it there, but you were talking about auditioning goals or like trying them out.
Oh,
Can you
yeah.
talk to me a little about this?
Yeah, so don't marry the goal. Don't marry a new goal. That'd be like speed dating and getting married at the same night. So
Yeah.
like what happens is people, especially around January, December, January is
Yeah.
really goal focused. They go, this is my New Year's resolution. You go, you haven't done that for a week. You're making a year commitment. Like, that's bonkers. So that gets back to that freedom. Like, I quit a ton of goals because I'll try a bunch of easy goals. And an easy goals, there's a couple frameworks. It's like, you can try it in less than 7 days. It doesn't cost any money. It doesn't take a lot of time. But so I'll try a bunch of goals and go, yeah, that was not for me. Like, I tried it and it didn't work for me. And so let me try a different one. Not as because I failed it, but like,
Mhm.
no, let me try a different one. Like, my wife teased me about that. I was trying to drink a gallon of water a day, and she saw me one day in the kitchen, like gulping, like painfully, like just trying to, she was like, what are you doing? Who's making you do this? And I was like, gotta get this water down. And she was like, you look miserable. And I was like, I am. And she was like, it's your goal, change it. And I was like, so I can do that. So I really
Yeah.
like helping people kind of audition them, test them, and then grow them, like add a little bit more. So I'll give you an example of this. A friend of mine, we were talking, and I was like, what's your goal this year? He's like, I want to do 100 sales calls a week. I was like, all right, that's a lot. I was like, how many do you do a week right now? And he goes, 5. I was like, so you're going to 20 exit? I was like, okay, fair enough. I was like, I get it, aggressive. I said, how many hours a week would it take for you to do that goal? And he said, about 25 hours a week. And I was like, how many hours of free time do you have in your week right now? And he's like, none. Free time. I'm very busy. And I said, there's your problem. Like I say, dreaming runs on optimism, planning runs on realism. And people have a hard time making that transition. And so I just want to say, like, if you're a busy mom and at the beginning of a planning unit, at the beginning of a year, you come up with things like 10 things you want to do, put a rough estimate of the time they'll take and then see if your schedule allows them. Because otherwise you have failed before you started. And so I'd much rather you go, I know that in this season, I got 20 free minutes every day. That's it, 20.
Yeah.
And you go, so when I have those 20, I'm going to savor them. I'm going to use them. And here's the little goal I'm going to plug into them. And I'm going to audition things. And then again, I'm going to grow it over time. Like we say that with our kids all the time. Like when there's a passion they're into, your birding thing. Maybe this kid turns in, like that becomes a huge passion. Like,
Yeah.
and they go to college for it someday. Maybe it's just a passing fancy because kids like to try a ton of stuff. The problem with parenting, in my opinion, is sometimes we suffocate kids' passions because we're so excited they have one. So a
Totally.
kid goes, I like art. And we go, you're an artist. Every birthday present, you're getting crayons and markers. We're signing you up for lessons. And like we suffocate this. And then the kid is like, I just said I liked art because I had drawn that day and it was kind of fun. Like I don't want to beret for Christmas. Like I don't want to have to. And so I think that's the dance we do as parents is that We can nurture it, we can throw fuel on it, but we can't suffocate it.
As homeschoolers, we take it even a step further, I think, because our kids will be like, I loved Harry Potter. And we're like, we're going to do a Harry Potter unit study. And now we're doing science
for
and
3
geography. And they're like, you just
Yeah.
ruined Harry Potter. What the heck?
Yeah, I'd like Harry Potter to feel like work. Like,
Yeah,
you're like, oh,
exactly.
I want you to know how long the wand is and what the properties of Hermione's hair. Yeah.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. The auditioning goal is exactly the example we were just talking about with the birding, is like, instead of saying like, we're going to do a whole birding thing, I'll be like, okay, let's just go look at birds on Saturday morning. And then you said, he might be like, that's it. Or it might go like, can we do that again?
Well, and then he doesn't feel the pressure of living up to what's now your expectation.
Totally.
So if you go,
yeah.
I made it a whole thing, he feels like, oh, mom's really into this. I kind of have to pretend I am too.
Yeah,
versus
exactly.
Like, as a homeschool mom, I guarantee you could come up with 4 steps of progression where you're like, the first one is on a Saturday morning, very light. We go to a farmer's market and we look at plants. They mentioned they like plants. Mm-hmm. So we're going to go do a walk around at a farmer's market to look at the type of plants that are sold, or type of food that's sold in our area. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that we had farms like that. And then you go to the second level, if that goes well, is we read one book about it. We just read a book. It's not a unit yet. And then the third level is this. And then like, that's what I mean by like progressing your goals. Because most people only have 2 versions. It's nothing or everything. Mm-hmm. And then, and there's no room in between. And I think if you can give yourself some steps, it's easier.
Yeah. So good. So good. Okay, you guys, we have only touched a tiny bit. We talked about parts of the first 2 chapters. I think I only gave you a highlight of 3 of these questions to make your own best moments list, but there are 10 in here. So you could listen to the audiobook. I loved the audiobook. I also got myself a hard copy so I'd have the prompts.
Love it. Babies need shoes. Babies need shoes.
I love
Let's go. That dress I bought my daughter today was expensive. So thank you at the boutique.
Yeah, you're welcome, because I bought the book in all the different formats. It's possible I also have it on my Kindle, frankly. But then you can look at the prompts and help yourself make a best moments list, which I think will help you decide what's worth your time in the coming year. And then also, like Jon said, you don't need to make it from 0 to 100. Like, audition something. Just try it. See how it fits.
Build a homeschool you enjoy. Don't look up a year into it and realize, I hate this school we're part of and we created it. Like, this has like, if you right now, my wife says this to me all the time. She's like, you have a really hard boss and it's you. And that's her way of going, oh, you're right. Why am I doing these things? I guarantee you can build a homeschooling program that you look up and go, man, this is so difficult and so stressful. And our family is fighting. And it's just the worst. And you're like, who's in charge of it? Oh, wait, I'm the principal in this situation. Mm-hmm. So how do I, along the way, make sure that I'm building the thing that fits our family, that fits our season, that fits our hearts, that fits where we're trying to go, without
having to overhaul things or make a goal from 0 to 100, just little tiny bits at a time.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget to ask you about your new book, because I love the whole book, but I especially love the best moments chapter. And then I think that's kind of the basis maybe of the book you wrote with your daughters, but I won't put those words in your mouth. You tell me about it.
Yeah. So a funny thing happened when my book on mindset soundtracks came out. Parents came out of the woodwork and said, hey, do you have a version for teenagers? And that had never happened. And so a lot of parents came to me and said, my teen is struggling with their mindset. If I could help them with their mindset, it would change the arc of their life. In Nashville, as an example, it's a 4 to 6 month wait for teen counseling. So when a teenager finally is brave enough to say, hey, I need to talk to somebody, they go, great, we'll see you in half a year.
Yeah.
So, and then we just started to see broken soundtracks in teenagers. So we were at a swim meet and this girl got out of the pool and said to her mom, I'm the slowest swimmer on the team. I'll never get better. And my wife and I looked at each other and said, oh, those are just broken soundtracks. She can change that. And I would just say, as a parent, if you hear absolutes, it's usually a broken soundtrack. So I'll never get better at geometry. I'm the only one who doesn't have the new iPhone. Everyone went to the party but me. Those are often signs of broken soundtracks, and you can change those. But I knew if I wrote the book, it would sound like an adult trying to sound young. Like it would be like, hello, fellow youths. Like I wear Michael Jordans too. I don't crease the J's. Like I got so much Riz. I'm a Risley bear. Like I knew it would sound so terrible.
Yeah.
So I asked my 2 teenage daughters to help me with it. And that led to the second book too, where we said, okay, all these parents are like, if I could get my kid motivated, if I could find something they care about, if I could get them invested in their own future, how do we do that? And so we did a teen version of All It Takes Is a Goal, because it's like anything else. It's compound interest. like, imagine if you as a 16-year-old could have started to work on some of these things, how that compounds over. Like, I'd much rather give a kid some tools versus repair them as a 42-year-old that's had a job they hated for 20 years
Yep.
and doesn't know how they got there. So that's what How Teens Win became. Was my daughters and I sat down and said, okay, if we were going to help teenagers really achieve their goals in a realistic way, in a way that's in their language, that builds them up, and pushes back against so much cultural conversation right now. Like, for instance, there's a broken soundtrack that people in their 20s are dealing with, which everybody keeps telling them, you'll never own a house. You'll never own a house. You'll never own a house.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, is that a broken soundtrack? Because they eventually believe it. And they don't even try to do the things that would lead to owning a house. They just accept, my generation will never, it'll be impossible for my generation to own a house.
Yeah.
And we're working very hard in our house with our kids to go, no, like, you won't be able to go to Europe at 26, but you shouldn't be in Europe. Like, don't do your honeymoon solo at 26. Like, that's a lot of money. Like, what if so there's all these conversations that's open in our own house, but that's what How Teens Win was. How do we help teenagers have goal setting and goal achieving that shapes the rest of their life?
So good. Okay. As you're talking about broken soundtracks in our teens, everybody who's listening, tell me in the comments if you want me to have Jon back to talk about soundtracks and how we can help our kids improve their soundtracks and our own soundtracks in our mind to improve our mindset.
That book's been a wild conversation for me, and it's been a lot of fun helping parents with it, helping teenagers with it. It's being taught in schools right now, which is great.
So cool.
My hope is in the future, like, 30 years ago, we didn't give kids any financial advice. We'd go, hey, here's a credit card. Try not to buy a jet ski. And then they wreck their lives. And now there's personal finance lessons for teenagers. Mm-hmm. My hope is that there's mindset classes eventually for teenagers on, hey, here's how to think about yourself. Here's how to think about challenges. Here's how your thoughts turn into your actions and your actions turn into your results. So let's be deliberate about the words we say. And it's funny, my oldest daughter, Ellie, uses soundtracks all the time. She texted us. She went and studied in London for a semester, her sophomore year of college. And she said, we came up with some new soundtracks. One that I'm telling everybody is Tired Beats Regretful. Tired Beats Regretful. Because some of the students were staying home in London watching Netflix instead of going out and going on a tour of the city or going. And she was like, no. Like, I'd rather be tired than regretful. Like, this is like, I'd rather be tired than regretful. And so it's fun to see teenagers get it immediately. Yeah. And they'll start to call you out as a parent on your soundtracks too, which is super fun too.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Okay. I'm going to put Jon's books in the show notes for this episode. All It Takes Is a Goal, his new one, How Teens Win, soundtracks, all my favorites. Jon, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been way fun.
I love doing it. I appreciate you supporting the work. That means a lot to me.
Show notes for this episode are at readaloudrevival.com/249. I'll include links to several of Jon's books. I'm a huge fan of his writing, his podcast. We'll put that in there too. And if you'd like me to have him back to talk about soundtracks, tell me in the YouTube comments. And that way I'll know there's enough of us that want to hear it. And I'll have him back and we'll talk about it. I'll be back here in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, you know what to do. Go make meaningful and lasting connections with your kids through books.